Hello, I'm Jack Blanchard.
And I'm Dasha Burns. It is Thursday, May 29th.
And this is the Playbook Podcast. Good
Good
morning.
morning.
My goodness, there's a lot of news suddenly happening again, Dasha. We were talking about being quiet at the start of the week.
I knew you were jinxing it.
It's not anymore. There are three big stories dominating the day, and none of them bigger than the sensational court ruling last night, the unanimous judgment that basically all of Donald Trump's tariffs so far have been illegal.
That is a big, big wrench in one of his most prominent policy agendas.
More big courts news coming today. A second item we'll get into afterwards. We're expecting some judgments from the Supreme Court this morning. We don't know what on, but that could be a colossal story for all we know. And also Trump's fight against Harvard University is back in court today. That's a real big one. Trump's effort to block Harvard from having international students will be heard before a court in Massachusetts today.
We need to get a law degree, Jack. It's all legal today.
Luckily, I've been chatting to our legal reporters. So I've downloaded a law degree into my brain for the purpose of this podcast. Let's start with tariffs, though, because this really is a properly big story, an absolute jaw dropper, frankly, from the US Court of International Trade. The background to this is that Donald Trump used a pretty unusual mechanism to introduce these tariffs.
Yes.
And that rather got lost in the whirl of it all. He basically said we're in the middle of a national crisis and therefore I should be allowed to unilaterally impose tariffs, which normally would be something that Congress does. And people kind of went, really? But then they just started being imposed and people just accepted it. And there were lawyers going, not sure you're allowed to do that, President, the whole time. But it rather got drowned out by the noise of what he was doing.
Yeah, and because there have been legal challenges to just about every move that this administration has made.
Right, exactly. And this was one more. Anyway, we've got through to its judgments last night, and it was a unanimous ruling of a 3-judge panel, the US Court of International Trade.
It's huge. And I think one of the aspects of it, it might mean that the government might have to pay back some of the duties that it has collected, which is just a wild thing to think about.
Exactly. Go and find those billions of dollars and hand them back to the businesses that have been paying them ever since Trump came in at the start of the year, which again, extraordinary and humiliating for the government. And, really puts a sledgehammer through Donald Trump's economic policy, or at least what he says his economic policy is. If this is what happens, they're going to appeal the judgment, right? You'd imagine, Dasha, this is going all the way to the Supreme Court.
It's going to the Supreme Court. There's no doubt. And in the meantime, I mean, look, this is one of the legal tools that they've used. It's called the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEPA, that they use to enact these tariffs. There are other avenues that they have used and might try to use in order to put some of these tariffs back in place or try to get around this ruling. The thing is, this Trump administration, and particularly Stephen Miller, has been working with all of these groups that have been developing these policy ideas, these legal loopholes and avenues to have Trump enact some of these unprecedented policy measures. And so while this is a huge blow, I would watch and see what the Stephen Millers of this administration do, because they are adamant about making this stuff happen, shoving it through the process and finding those loopholes even when the courts stand in their way. But the courts, let's be clear, have been absolutely the biggest roadblock for this administration enacting its agenda. It's not been the Democrats. Certainly, it has not been Congress. The courts have been the primary mechanism for slowing him down.
It reminds me very much of the case of the Venezuelan nationals that Trump deported to El Salvador using that 1798 bit of legislation that had only ever been used in wartime before.
Alien Enemies Act, yep.
Right. The Trump administration basically arguing in that case that these people coming into the country were the same as an actual invasion, and therefore they had the grounds to use those special powers. Again, that is still going through the courts. That may well also prove to be deemed illegal by the judges. And this reminds me of the same thing, really bending, stretching the realms of how you can use the language in the law to do what you want.
Oh, totally. And they did so much of this so quickly and in such massive volume that it's taken a while for some of this to catch up to them. But now I feel like you're seeing the bottleneck explode. And I mean, basically all of the topics we mentioned at the top in the headlines today are legal battles that he is now facing. Again, I think it's going to slow some stuff down. I don't think it's going to stop them from continuing to push forward with legally dubious gray area stuff going forward, though.
It leaves Trump in a particularly fascinating position in terms of his trade negotiations, though, right? Like, here we are
Right.
talking at the weekend about this thing he did. Let's pick the EU as the most recent example. Friday, suddenly dramatically announces on Truth Social, oh, you're having a 50% tariff. Then on Sunday, gets a call from von der Leyen, who runs the EU, says we're going to pause the tariffs for this negotiation. This is his leverage for that trade negotiation. And the EU is just watching this court ruling going, well, are we still negotiating here? Like, what are you going to do to us now? And that's just one of the negotiations that's meant to be happening right now. I mean, where it leaves him, I guess they don't know. They don't know.
Right. Well, and the way that our system works, essentially, they're going to keep appealing this, right, until the Supreme Court makes some sort of clear ruling, if it gets there, which, again, I really do believe it probably will. But in the meantime, they kind of have to, and I think they will, try to operate business as usual. But this in the backdrop, I mean, it is the elephant in the room of every conversation he's going to have about tariffs from now on.
It would certainly cast a bit of a shadow over those trade negotiations. And we saw Donald Trump really getting very angry in the White House yesterday.
There's a term that he doesn't like so much.
He was triggered, basically, wasn't he? And you don't actually see it that often, but it was put to him by one of the reporters asking questions in the Oval Office that people on Wall Street, and this has been written up in financial papers, have started for referring to his tariffs as taco tariffs. And no one had told him this. Like, none of his media advisors had dared to mention this.
No one printed out those articles for him.
But a taco tariff is an acronym that stands for Trump always chickens out, i.e. he comes up with a big tariff and then at the last minute it doesn't quite happen. And oh my goodness, when you saw the president's face when this is explained to him, he didn't like it one bit, Dasha. He did not like that one bit.
No. I did have a friend who owns a small business tell me, can you just tell that reporter to hush? Because, like, it's good. We like when he chickens out. Like, he thinks it's a good thing. We think it's a good thing. Don't point it out.
Don't poke the bear. Well, the bear was well and truly poked. But the irony is, within a few hours, it looks like he can't even chicken out because now he doesn't have the power to impose these tariffs in the first place, or at least that's where we are at the moment. I think two things are certain. We will hear a lot of anger out of the White House. It's already starting to drop last night in terms of statements. Trump is going to blow his top about this as well, without a shadow of a doubt. And it's going to keep rolling in the courts. But there is now a very serious question mark over whether these tariffs are going to be an option going forward for him.
Absolutely. And how quickly this gets resolved is also a huge question.
And if the ruling ends up being that it's down to Congress to impose tariffs, it's very hard to see a Congress imposing anything like the sorts of tariffs that Donald Trump's been doing away with.
Well, in a practical sense, this kind of back and forth negotiation is just not going to be possible.
Exactly. Let's talk about loads more court cases, because I just can't believe how much legal stuff is going on.
Okay.
As I mentioned, we should just flag there is something coming from the Supreme Court this morning. We don't know what it is. And I'm just putting that on people's radar this morning because it could be the biggest story of the year or it might not be. But that is a thing that is coming. What we definitely know is happening is in Massachusetts, there's going to be a hearing about Donald Trump's attempt to ban Harvard University from taking foreign students, which was easily the most damaging thing that he has tried to do to Harvard since he's sort of gone to war with it. The judge in Massachusetts put a very temporary block on the ban last Friday, and this hearing is going to determine whether or not that ban should stay in place for a longer period. Potentially, it could be a year or even longer. Why is Donald Trump so keen to go after Harvard, do you think, Dasha? I mean, from the outside, it's like this is one of America's great, most prestigious institutions. It comes up with amazing research. It brings in all sorts of smart people. What's your sense of why he would be trying to do this?
Look, this is the absolute red meat for the base. If you have gone to any of his rallies, everything that Harvard stands for and represents, including sort of that globalism, is everything that the MAGA base, that was a huge part of his election, certainly in 2016 and this time around as well, everything that they deplore, everything that they feel has ostracized them, the kinds of people that they feel look down upon them, that President Trump has really stoked. You saw Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary, go on Fox News and say, you know, we want people going to trade schools. We want more plumbers and carpenters. We don't want people majoring in LGBTQ studies at Harvard. This is the dividing line. This is sort of like the wedge issue. And Trump is so good at finding symbols, because it's not just Harvard, right? Like, a lot of the themes that they're talking about with Harvard also apply to all sorts of other universities. And I know a lot of universities right now are like, okay, focus on Harvard, like, don't think about us. But Harvard, because it has a name recognition, because it is so storied, and he has been able to wrap up all of the sort of anger at the liberal elite left into this institution is just a perfect catalyst for telling that story. And that's something he's so well versed at. The difference, though, in this context is this election, he brought in so many different demographics into the big tent now that is the Republican Party. And you have a lot of people, I mean, the Elon Musks of the world, right? A lot of Silicon Valley that was made by international students that came to this country and studied and built products and built companies here. And so it's not as cut and dry for the broader tent and his broader coalition. But when it comes to the base and the people that are the diehard Trump supporters who have been loyal to a T, this wraps it all up and puts a bow on it.
Two interesting things, I think, about the way this story is developing. One is that we got some of the court papers that Harvard have put into the judge ahead of the hearing today. They seem to be focusing quite hard in the argument that they're making that blocking foreign students from coming to Harvard is a huge boon to somewhere like China, because these sorts of internationally mobile, super smart people, they need to go somewhere. They want to go somewhere. And it strikes me that that's quite a political argument for Harvard to be making, quite a potentially smart one. If you're looking for allies in the wider Trump world, the GOP, right, saying, well, you're just doing this thing and you're handing China this huge advantage. That seems to me like an argument that might play quite well beyond the courtroom and actually in DC or the right parts of it.
With President Trump, there's the argument inside the courtroom, and then there's the argument to the media and to all of the different audiences watching the court of public opinion. Yet the China piece of it is a smart argument, and I believe that their lawyer is a prominent GOP lawyer that they've hired. So
Right.
they would know. And that's also what I am saying about the Republican Party is not necessarily all fully united on this issue, though publicly, of course, they'll say that. Also, think about everyone on the Hill, and a lot of people in the party, in politics in general, went to Harvard. There are easy pieces of it, the campus protests, the anti-Semitism arguments that they're making. That's kind of low-hanging fruit that a lot of the party can stand behind. But there are aspects to this that will not sit well with the Silicon Valley types and some of the old school Republican types.
The last thing to say about it is that I do also think the other reason he's really going after Harvard so hard is because Harvard, of course, is the university that stood up to him, right? So many of the other unis he went after first just folded very quickly. They cut pretty eyebrow-raising deals. Harvard was just like, no, we're going to hire some good lawyers and we'll see you in court. And therefore, Trump being Trump, he's pushing every button he can to try and stop them, right?
It's a fight. And again, he's able to wrap into it the idea of anti-Semitism, the idea of liberal elitism, the idea of globalism and immigration, and all of this stuff that he can sort of capture in a single institution that is now willing to fight him. And so he's going to punch back with all he's got.
Let's finish with a post on what used to be called Twitter. It seems in at the appropriate place for Elon Musk to have bid farewell to his, how long's it been? 4 and a bit month government project.
He came in with a chainsaw. He went out with a tweet.
There you go. Elon Musk last night. As my scheduled time as a special government employee comes to an end, I would like to thank President Donald Trump for the opportunity to reduce wasteful spending. The DOGE mission will only strengthen over time as it becomes a way of life throughout the government. That sounds pretty optimistic to me from Elon Musk. I do not believe that the DOGE mission is going to strengthen over time as he departs. Do you?
Well, and that's not what he's said publicly.
Right.
He's been going on a bit of a media blitz and criticizing the big, beautiful bill and kind of going out, lighting the bridge behind him just a little bit. Look, he's a massive enough figure who commands such an audience that I don't think we have seen or heard the last of him, rockets aside, but like on the policy of this administration. I don't think he's going to be shy about sharing his opinions.
I agree. And I would say, looking at the DOGE thing over the 4-month period, at the very start, it seemed like this massive, massive transformational thing. Looking at it now, it's hard to see it as anything other than a pretty big failure. He got nowhere near the savings figures that he was promising before the election, like not even in the ballpark.
No.
And did it really end up even saving hardly any money at all? I don't feel like it did.
It certainly left a lot of institutions in shambles.
Right.
And has had an impact. Like, you can't argue that it hasn't. And it's kind of remarkable how much oxygen it consumed in that first 100 days and how it feels like this blip. And yet the after effects, I think we're going to be seeing for a long time.
Absolutely. And I think in the end, it was kind of people power that did for Elon Musk, I would say, and the DOGE project, because he just became this real flashpoint figure for the administration. We saw it in that special election up in the Midwest when he went up with the big cheese on his head and everyone hated him and voted the other way. We saw it with the way that Tesla's standing amongst half of the country has just collapsed. And the investors in Tesla were getting worried about that. And suddenly Elon Musk was more worried about protecting his reputation and his businesses than he was in carrying on with this project.
Well, nothing about the Musk of it all was what I think any of us, including the voters who cast their ballots for Trump, were expecting to be such a big part of the agenda in the early days. I think a lot of people were into the slash government spending, but they were into it in theory, and it was much more the economic message. I will help lower grocery prices. I will help make homes more affordable, and immigration, of course. Those were the things that people believed in and were passionate about and wanted to see Trump lead on. So the DOGE thing, I think, threw a lot of folks for a bit of a loop.
And just finally, Dasha, I guess within the sort of Trump world circle, within the cabinet, I'm guessing quite a lot of people will be glad to see him gone, right?
I think some of the palace intrigue will die down because of that absence. Yes.
There you go. But I suspect there'll still be plenty of palace intrigue for us to talk about on the podcast in the weeks
we'll bring it. We'll bring it to you.
All right. That's all we've got time for. Thanks so much for listening today. We have much more news and analysis, as we always do, in today's Playbook newsletter, which you can find at politico.com/playbook. We'll be back tomorrow, or at least our colleagues will. Have a great Thursday. Thanks, Dasha.
Cheers, everybody.